Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'asukot divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'pinu v'yibcha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאימך בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
Amen.
Amen.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו לעולם אשר בנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Okay, let's go to Gemara. I want to try and finish a little earlier. I'm not giving this to go. So now we on 16b1, and the Gemara is discussing a ruling concerning damage by a lion. So I just want to put a premise here, because when I first read this, I don't know if when you first read this part of the daf, it seemed a bit confusing for you. But when I first read it on Saturday, the lion pounces, it scratches, it doesn't, it eats, the animal's not dead, it is dead. Did anybody have confusion when they first read this? Or was it just...
No. Me too.
It was pretty confusing.
And then at the end, is it Shane? Is it Karen? What's going on? What's the point?
It's quite tricky. Yeah.
All right. So as long as I wasn't the only one that was drowning originally, not that it gives me any hope that everybody else is drowning. Don't get worried. I'd rather you cope. But anyway, eventually, with Hashem's help, I figured it out. So now there's a couple of ground rules I want to place that's going to help this case a lot easier. First thing is, when the Gemara cites a ruling concerning damage by a lion, we're not talking about a wild lion here. We're talking about a domesticated lion. Why? The default position of a wild lion or any other animal is that it's muad. Okay? Now we're saying muad in theory. Why are we saying muad in theory? Because if nobody owns it, who are you going to get the damages from?
True.
Who? So that's the issue. We learned that in the case of a domestic ox that has no owner, that unless you can place a legal case against somebody, there's very little to talk about. You might be owed the full amount, but there's nobody in terms of whom to prosecute. So the first premise here is this is what's supposedly a domesticated lion, and then because somebody owns it, is responsible. If you remember quite correctly, that according to Tosfot, that what's considered domesticated is you take it from its infancy. In other words, if an animal supposedly can survive in the wild, it's not fully domesticated. You know, sometimes if you rear an animal from very young, that can't go back and integrate in the wild. So again, we're talking about a privately owned lion, and that lion is domesticated. So the Gemara cites a ruling concerning damage done by a lion. So Shmuel said, in the case of a lion that attacks an animal in the public domain, if it pounces upon it and ate it, its owner is exempt. But if it tore the animal and then ate it, the owner is liable.
That was confusing, by the way.
Correct. So that's why I'm going to unpack it. Kev, are you back?
Yeah.
All right. So it is confusing. So I'm going to repeat it and then explain it. Shmuel said, in the case of a lion that attacks an animal in the public domain, if it pounced upon it and ate it, its owner is exempt. But if it tore the animal and then ate it, the owner is liable. So the first thing that doesn't make sense is that why would the owner be exempt? So there's a principle I need to explain to you, and that principle is pretty clear. What this means is that there are two exemptions in the public domain. Kevin, what are they?
Two exemptions.
For what types of damage?
Are you talking about Karen or regular or shade? Well, is that what you're talking about, or just specific cases?
No, you tell me. What, hey, guys, I'm throwing the question out to all of you. Kevin, no, I'm sorry, but it's breakfast time.
No, Kevin got it. Kevin got it. He said it.
No, he said he included Karen, which is not true, Gavin.
No, is he talking about it? Okay, Shane and Regal.
No, I get it, but you can't throw every damage at me. You've got to be specific with me. It's not unreasonable.
No, but he corrected himself. He said, no, then it's Shane and Regal.
Okay, so Kevin, that's fair enough. If you just said Shane and Regal, that's absolutely true. Karen, you liable in the public domain. But for Karen, you liable in the public domain, but for Shane and Rego, you exempt. And the reason you exempt, guys, is why?
Because then
Why you exempt?
it's public domain and
The usual way of
Animal.
walking and behaving.
it's normal behavior of
normal
animal.
behavior.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reason why you exempt is the pasuk says with regards to the animal and its way of eating and walking, you are liable in the domain of another.
Yeah.
That's the pasuk that I'm looking for. Is that how do we know there's an exemption? Is because the public domain is not owned by one person, a private person in the field of another. So the minute you're talking about in the field of another, it comes to exclude the public domain in terms of liability. So it's for that reason that you exempt. The fact that it's common damage, yes, the animal way of walking is natural and common because, as Kevin said quite rightly, every time the animal moves, it does damage. However, you're still liable in the field of another. So it's not the commonality that makes you liable or exempt. It's the biblical pasuk that says when you do Shane and Rego, which is one pasuk, in the field of another, it means that in privately owned fields, you are liable, and in the public domain, in the Rishus Harabim, you exempt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, based on that, Kevin got most of it. So, Kevin, well done. You were accurate. We just were looking for that biblical pasuk also. So, Kevin, what it's saying now is as follows, is according to Shmuel, in the case of a lion that attacks an animal in the public domain, if it pounced upon it and ate it, the owner is exempt. So why are we saying the owner is exempt? Because if a lion attacks an animal, pounced on it, and ate it, this is a classic case of Shane. And in the case of Shane, in the Rishus Harabim, in the public domain, the owner is exempt. Does that make sense? So that's pretty clear and straightforward. Once you've got the ground rules, it's easy to understand this. But it's saying, but if it tore the animal and ate it, the owner is liable. Why? The reason being is we're going to find out as follows, is that what's considered normal for a lion to eat? A lion isn't afraid of anything. So with a lion, it would jump directly on the animal and basically eat it while it's still alive. I mean, you've seen these National Geographics where it grabs it by the throat and it starts ripping the animal and eating while the animal is not 100% dead, because the lion isn't afraid of a buck, not by any means. So it's not like certain animals that have to render their prey immediately dead in order that they fear the prey's retaliation to get out of the situation. So for example, when you see an eagle fight a snake, I don't know if you guys have ever watched this in National Geographic. The eagle actually wins. It can kill the snake, and then it actually partakes and eats it. Remember that an eagle is a carnivorous bird. That's why it's not kosher. But it definitely wants to render the snake useless. Otherwise, it's going to be bitten and succumb to its toxins. So when an animal is not afraid of its prey, it doesn't mind eating it half alive. And that's why there's a biblical excerpt that you can't tear the flesh off a living animal. Kevin, it's one of the Noahide laws, as you know.
Aver min achai.
Correct. Exactly. So, and this isn't only incumbent upon a Jewish person, it's incumbent upon all human beings to make us different from the animals in that we are not allowed to tear the flesh off a living animal. Okay? Because it exhibits cruelty. But since it's an animal's instinct, it's not. So what we're saying in this case is Shmuel exempts if a lion pounces on an animal and starts eating it, because this is a classic case of Shane. And since this is the way the animal eats normally, just like a cow would eat foliage and grass, and this is the way the lion eats, it's therefore exempt. The owner is therefore exempt if the lion does this in the public domain. Okay. So I'm going to use an example. Is Paris there, Marco?
She's sleeping now.
Okay, so then I can say this, it won't hurt her feelings.
Yeah.
So,
No, we don't.
if you walk in Paris in the public domain and you're in the, and you're going to the marketplace to get a bit of food for Shabbos, and all of a sudden a lion jumps on her and starts noshing her, then in that particular case, you're obviously very distraught and you want to sue the owner of the lion. But you won't be able to because it's a classic case the animal eats and it occurred in the public domain.
Yeah.
Some of the rabbis feel that this is a bit of an issue. The reason it's a bit of an issue is because they were saying, when I read some of the commentaries, that you're not expected to protect your animal in a way in the public domain, because if you look at it, when a cow eats grass and another cow eats grass, you're not expecting one cow to attack another cow. And if Paris suddenly got hit by a lion, you're not looking out for that. And by the way, as much as you love Paris, if a lion's coming for you, outrun Paris, then you're fine.
I'll stand in the way.
Just a tip.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of the cat family, Arthur's got one from his cat family.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
lions.
No, I think it's a parrot. He has
Oh,
told her.
All right. So now that you understand the first part, the second part says, but if the lion tore the animal and then ate it, the owner is liable. Okay. So why is the owner liable if in the public domain? If the lion tore it and tore the animal and then ate it? Why? Why would the lion's owner be liable?
If it's Muad, maybe. Not?
Okay, Muad. What do you mean Muad? If you say okay, so far what we're learning is this is not a case of Keren so far, Kev. This is a classic case of Shane. So in a classic case of Shane, Kevin, what we're looking for is the lion's attribute is as follows. Is that, what is Shane? Give me a definition of Shane, Kev.
Eating.
Yes. So this isn't a case of Keren. It's not unusual for an animal to pounce and prey and eat it. It's a carnivorous animal. So this is a classic case of Shane. The only time that you can have Tam and Muad, classically, is in the case of Keren, which is unusual damage, and not for the sake of eating. The animal in this case just wants to kill. Does that make sense? Without eating. In other words, just to cause injury. But here, lion's naturally a carnivorous creature and wants to eat. So what it's saying is as follows, is that if a lion tears an animal and then ate it, it's considered unusual it's considered not the way an animal usually eats. And therefore, if it's not a case of Shane, the owner is liable in the public domain. Why is the owner liable in the public domain? Because as Kevin said, it's a case of Keren, but it's not Muad yet. So far, the animal would be Tam, which means it's a case of half damages.
Okay.
So what we're saying is as follows, very simply, is in the way that an animal, usually a lion, who's a carnivorous creature, hunts, where it pounces on an animal and starts eating without killing it or tearing it to pieces and eats the animal while it's still alive. This is classic Shane because this is the way the animal usually eats. If the animal gets onto its prey, tears it to death and eats it at the point that the animal is dead, this is unusual damage. And therefore, this would be Keren. We've lost Arthur on the screen. Arthur, did I lose you?
No, Nelly's asked me a question, so I just put myself on mute for a second.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, guys, as follows. Please follow with me here. It's very important. So what I'm saying is, if it's a case of Shane, you exempt in the public domain. If it's a case of Keren, you liable in the public domain. In the way that the lion normally eats is classic case of Shane, and then according to Shmuel, the owner would be exempt. So in the case where the lion would jump on Paris and rip her and start to chow her. She's asleep. Otherwise, I wouldn't mention it, Michael. In that particular case, classic Shane, as annoyed as you are with the owner, you wouldn't have a legal case because classic case of Shane, this is the way a lion eats. It's exempt in the public domain. If the lion jumped on Paris and ripped her and tore her and made sure she was dead first and then ate, in that case, you would have a legal case. Why? Because it's a case of Keren, because the animal, a lion, does not usually kill its prey before it starts to eat. It's not afraid of its prey. It wouldn't be afraid of Paris. And because it's unusual damages, you've got a legal case now for Keren. And in this case, if the lion hadn't damaged 3 times, it's considered an unwarned lion owner, and therefore it's Tom. You're liable for half damages. Does that make sense? Good. Let's go on.
Sorry, I just want to ask, sorry.
Yeah.
Just fancy,
Yeah.
you're saying if it attacked and tore it and ate it while it was alive, it was okay, it's half damages. But if it killed it and ate it, that's unusual and that's full damages. Was it the other way?
No. You got part of it right.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just determine the way the animal usually gets physical gratification, which
Okay.
was Kevin said, which was right, and the animal eats. For a lion is not afraid of its prey, so if it jumps on its prey, grips it and starts to virtually eat it and grip it by the neck, that's the usual way that the lion behaves.
Yes.
And therefore it's Shane, because that's the way the animal usually eats.
Okay.
And therefore Shane is exempt in the public domain.
Okay.
So Michael wouldn't have a case against the owner. If the lion behaved in an unusual way, in that it first wanted to kill its prey because it was a bit nervous of it, and then ate,
Okay.
by first killing it by tearing it to pieces and making sure the animal was dead, and then started to eat. This is unusual for a lion because a lion's not afraid of its prey. And since this is unusual behavior, this would be listed as Keren, and Michael would have a case for either muad damages if the ox was warned, the lion was warned owner was warned 3 times. It's a muad lion. But in this case, it would be that Michael can extract from the owner of the lion half damages because this is a case of Keren.
Okay.
Because it's unusual the way the lion killed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So the Gemara explains the reason for the distinction. If the lion pounces upon an animal and ate it, its owner is exempt. For eat it. This case is equivalent to where an animal ate fruit or vegetables, which is the classic case of Shane damage in the public domain, and the owner is therefore exempt. So what this Gemara is basically saying is a carnivorous animal has a certain behavior in terms of the way it eats, and just like a vegetarian animal that would eat in the public domain is exempt for Shane damage, so is this lion, if it ate in its normal manner to kill its prey, is considered exempt for Shane damage in the public domain. But if the lion tore its prey and ate it, it's not its normal behavior. And the attack is thus classified as Keren damage, for which the owner is liable, even in the public domain. Okay. So now that you've got the case.
Okay, got it.
Fine. The Gemara questions the assumption that the lion does not tear its prey. Because again, this is Shmuel's case of what's considered normal behavior for a lion by Shmuel's definition. So now the Gemara is going to come and pose a couple of contradictions to Shmuel, or a couple of questions. So the Gemara is now asking, does Shmuel mean to say that tearing prey is not normal behavior of the lion, but it is written a lion tears prey for its cubs? So what Shmuel is saying is that a lion is not afraid of its prey, and therefore generally just pounces upon it and can tear it with its teeth and eat it immediately. It doesn't have to, according to Shmuel, render its prey completely dead by tearing it and killing it because it's afraid of its prey. So therefore, any time that a lion would exhibit this ability to kill its prey outright before eating it is a sign that a lion wants to make sure its prey is dead and can't get away, and that's not a lion's normal behavior. So now the Gemara is bringing a couple of contradictions. It's saying, but hang on a second. Does Shmuel then mean to say that tearing prey is not normal behavior of a lion? But it is written, a lion tears prey for its cubs. Okay? Now, where is this written? In Nahum chapter 2, verse 13. And this is when the prophet is speaking allegorically of the city of Nineveh, which is compared to a mighty lion. Okay? So the Gemara answers, a lion will indeed tear and kill prey for its cubs. It does not, however, tear prey to eat for itself. So basically the Gemara is asking this question to Shmuel and saying, listen, I don't understand. We've learned that a lion does in fact tear and kill its prey, even when it's not necessarily eating it. So it's saying, no, listen, this isn't a problem. We're talking about a classic case of Shane when the lion then eats it. In this case, it's tearing and killing it in order to feed its cubs. So it doesn't render it a problem. It's normal behavior for an animal to kill its prey in order to give it to its cubs, but not in order to eat for itself. Then the second refutation is as follows. The Gemara persists, but the verse continues and says, it chokes its prey for its lioness. Thus we see that the lion normally does kill its prey. And then the Gemara answers the same as it did before, guys. It says it will kill for its lioness, but it will not kill prey that it wishes to eat itself. So again, why is it killing prey for its cubs? And why is it killing prey for its lioness? Because it doesn't want the animal to escape. So it wants to basically take it to its lair or take it to the female or cubs. But when eating for itself, it's not worried that the prey is going to escape. It's only if it's going to be then transporting it that it's going to become an issue. That's what the Gemara is saying. So then it brings another challenge to Shmuel, and it says, but the verse continues, and it fills its caves with torn prey. Thus we see that the lion kills even that which it does not feed to others. So basically the first argument was, yes, it kills it if it's feeding it to its cubs. And then the Gemara responds to Shmuel and says basically, well, basically it kills for its lioness. And it says, listen, it's the same thing as killing for its cubs. It's not for its own purpose. If it kills it for its lioness, then it kills it. It's not a problem. It's the normal way an animal lion behaves. So that's not a problem. And then it brings its third refutation, which is it basically kills it in order to store it in its caves with torn prey. So we can see this isn't a proof that it always kills and tears its prey in order to feed others, like the lioness or the cubs. And the Gemara said, listen, it's still normal behavior, because when the lion will kill prey that it intends to keep for storage in its caves, it will not kill its prey that it wishes to eat immediately. What it's saying is it picks up an opportunity to have food, and when it picks up an opportunity to have food, it will kill it and store it for a hungry meal later. So what we're trying to determine here is, as long as it's normal behavior for the animal, then that's considered shame. The minute it's abnormal behavior, it's considered caring. So if it's normal shame behavior, the owner of the lion is exempt in the public domain. If the lion exhibits unusual behavior, its owner is it's liable. Sorry, if it's shame behavior, the owner is exempt in the public domain, and if it's caring behavior, the lion's owner is liable in the public domain, because with caring damage, you're liable in the public domain. Whether it's tam or muad is to the extent that the animal's owner has been warned. Does that make sense? So what the Gemara is basically saying is, look, if it's eating it for itself, it pounces on the animal and rips it to shreds and starts eating immediately because it's not afraid of its prey. Classic case of Shane. If the animal, if the lion kills for its cubs and kills it outright, but takes it to its cubs, or takes it to its lioness, classic case of shame, because it's the normal way that the animal kills and its family is going to benefit. Or if it kills it outright to store it in its caves, this is normal. This is considered, or shame, the owner is exempt in the public domain. If it exhibits unusual behavior, the owner is liable in the public domain. Clear? Fine. So now that we've said that the animal, the Gemara persists, but the verse concludes and it's layers with the torn. This indicates that it's common for the lion to kill its prey. Now, when we say a lion's lair, L-A-I-R-S, I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Lair, L-A-I-R.
Yeah,
Lair.
lair. So I'm assuming that's where the animal resides. So they're saying, listen, it's still normal if an animal either stores it in its cave or it's wherever it resides for a juncture when the family and the lion is hungry. So basically, the Gemara raises a challenge from a brisa cited in the next chapter. Okay, so it was taught in a brisa. Now this brisa comes from Bava Kama 19b. Okay, and there's several. This brisa lists several cases that are classified as shade damage. So this brisa is now coming in 19b as a challenge to 16b1 for this particular daf. And it was taught in a brisa, and similarly, a wild beast entered the yard of the damaged party and tore an animal and ate the meat and pays full damages. Since the brisa speaks simply of beasts, the implication is that it refers even to lions. Okay? Now, one thing I wanted to clear up for you, when it brings this brisa and it says it's liable for payment, this initially threw me off when it says it's liable to pay full damages. But there's a word that you need to read from this brisa, and that word is as follows. And similarly, if a wild beast entered the yard of the damaged party. So again, if it entered the yard of the damaged party and was not in the public domain, of course for shame damage, it's liable for full payment. Because the natural state, as Kevin said quite rightly, is for shame damage, the animal is naturally moored. Correct, Kev? So if it entered, according to this brisa, the property of the damaged party for shame damage, yes, the animal, this is classic shame. And it says, and tore an animal and ate the meat, it pays full damages. So what we're seeing here is that since a lion is considered a, a wild beast, it's seeming to contradict Shmuel, because it says, listen, it's normal for a wild beast to tear its animal, its prey, to the extent that it kills it, and then at the point where it kills it, it then eats. So it's saying to Shmuel, no, it's not necessarily normal behavior that a lion will eat its animal, its prey, while it is alive, without killing it. So if you want to say that's normal, we've got a brisa that contradicts what you're saying. So guys, I don't want you to focus on the amount of payment in the damaged party's domain. That's a side point. The point here it's saying is it's arguing with Shmuel and saying, listen, you want to say that the normal way that a lion attacks its prey is it attacks it and eats it while the animal is alive. This brisa is saying that a wild animal kills its prey first by tearing it to pieces and then eats it. And since a lion is also a wild beast, this is a contradiction, Kev, to Shmuel. Does that make sense? So this brisa is coming to contradict Shmuel in 19b. Okay, now we're on 16b2. And it says, thus we see when a lion tears an animal, it's considered normal. For if it was abnormal, the owner would pay half damages. Okay, so what it's saying is that this, even when it tears its prey and makes sure the animal is dead and then the lion eats it, because a lion is a wild animal, this is saying that even that is considered normal, shame damage, and therefore in the public domain it's exempt, in the field of another party it's liable. So this is a refutation to Shmuel's way that a lion's natural behavior for the prey is to start eating its animal and kill it without killing it first. So the Gemara answers with, what are we dealing with here in this brisa? We don't have long left, guys. with a case where a lion tore the animal to store it for later consumption. In such a case, it's normal for a lion to tear and kill its prey, as we said above. Okay, so the Gemara challenges this interpretation of the Brisa, but the Brisa taught that the beast ate the meat. How can you say that it speaks of a case when the lion killed to store the meat? So I'm just going to repeat the Gemara once again. With what are we dealing with here in this Brisa? With a case where the lion tore the animal to store it for later consumption. In such a case, it is normal for a lion to tear and kill its prey, as we said above. The Gemara challenges this interpretation of the Brisa, but the Brisa is taught that the beast ate the meat. So how can you say that it speaks of a case where the lion killed to store the meat? So what it's saying here is that it apparently wants to resolve the contradiction by saying that, listen, the case in the Brisa is where the animal killed the animal outright in order to eat the meat and store it for later. So it's not a contradiction to the Brisa. And then the Gemara challenges the interpretation of the Brisa because it's saying, no, that's not what it says. The Brisa is actually saying that the wild beast tears the animal to death and then ate the meat, which is a complete contradiction to what Shmuel said. Okay? It says, so how can you speak of a case where the lion intended to store the meat? Because as the animal was torn to death, at that point, the wild beast ate the animal. So it's not about storage. So the Gemara then has a counter refutation to this, and it says the Gemara objects to this explanation. So it's coming to give a different point. It says, listen, here the Brisa refers to a case where the lion tore the animal with the intention to store it and then changed its mind and ate the meat. Thus, the tearing of the prey was a normal act. So it's saying, hang on a sec, it's not a contradiction to Shmuel because the animal, where did Kevin go? Oh, he had to go for his lesson, I guess. All right. So, Arthur, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so what we're saying is as follows, is it says, no, listen, it's not a contradiction to Shmuel, this Brisa, because what happened is the lion originally tore it and killed the animal in order to store it in its lair or its cave, and then changed its mind and ate the animal. Now, the classic question here that you should all be asking is, how do we read the thoughts of a lion? You can only judge based on action. You can't say, oh, well, the lion was going to do this and now is going to do that. It's ridiculous to say we can read the mind of an animal. Do any of you have this question?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So it was saying you can't judge an animal on what you think it intends to do and it changed its mind. You can only judge an animal on its behavior. That's all. Because we're not privy to read the minds of animals. So it says the Gemara objects to that above explanation. How would we know that a lion changes its mind? And furthermore, in the case of Shmuel as well, why do we hold an owner liable to half damages when this lion tears its prey in the public domain? So perhaps it was this way as well, that perhaps the lion tore the animal with the intention of storing it and only later changed its mind and ate it. So the Gemara is actually conceding and saying, listen, it's a valid point. You can't read the thoughts of animals. So the Gemara concedes the last point and therefore revises its previous explanation of the Brisa. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, when it said that the beast tore an animal and ate the meat, the Mishnah taught two separate cases. So number one, that the lion tore an animal in order to store it, or separately, a separate case, and it pounced upon the animal and ate it. In either case, its owner pays full damages. Thus, the Brisa does not contradict Shmuel's ruling. So it says, listen, it's not talking about one case here in the Brisa. It's talking about two scenarios, and it separates the statement that the lion killed the animal or any wild beast killed the animal in order to store it. That's one case. The second case is that the lion basically knocked over its animal, pounced on it, and started eating it live. That's the second case. And for there, in the damaged party's domain, you pay full payment because it's shmul damage. It's more damage, not shmul damage. It's more damage according to Shmuel, and therefore it doesn't contradict Shmuel at all. So this is a classic case of shame damage. So we're saying, okay, so that makes sense if you make it as two separate statements. The Brisa does not contradict Shmuel's ruling. So then another interpretation is offered, and all right, guys, we're getting to the conclusion. We'll be done in 3 minutes. Another interpretation is offered. Ravina said, in truth, it is the way of a lamb to tear apart its prey and eat it. Okay? And when did the Shmuel rule that a lamb that tears its prey in the public domain renders its owner liable? In the case of a domesticated lion. And Shmuel stated his ruling according to the review of Rav Elazar, who says that it's not normal for a domesticated lion to attack. Okay. So basically what's happening here is Ravina is saying something completely different. Is that he's saying that because it's a domesticated animal and it's a lion, it would be unusual for an animal, whichever way it did it, whether it pounced on it in order to eat it immediately, which would be classic shame, or tore it and killed it in order to store it. Either way, if it's a domesticated animal, it should be considered carrion damage, because it's unusual if it's domesticated to want to kill. Because we say only a snake is murad after you domesticated it. So he's saying it's not a case of shame at all, it's a case of carrion. Okay, so the Gemara objects to this interpretation. But if so, Shmuel is speaking of a domesticated lion, because why is Shmuel speaking of a domesticated lion? Because otherwise you wouldn't have an owner that's liable for the lion. There's nobody to sue. If it's a wild lion, we wouldn't have this as the case at all, off.
Yeah.
Because if it's a wild lion, it doesn't have an owner. There's no legal case. So we're saying that Shmuel is aware of the fact that it's a domesticated lion. So if so, Shmuel is speaking of a domesticated lion and following the view of Rav Elazar, that even in the case where the lion pounced upon the animal and ate it, the owner should be liable. Why does Shmuel exempt the owner in that case? So it was saying, listen, Shmuel is very well aware that it's a domesticated lion, because otherwise he wouldn't bring a case where you would have an owner that's liable. If it's a wild lion with no owner, there's nobody that's liable. Yeah. Okay, so it's saying that Ravina should know this. So the Gemara concedes the point and therefore revises Ravina's statement. Rather, the interpretation of Ravina was not stated in explanation of Shmuel's ruling, but rather an explanation of the Brisa, which ruled that if a lion entered the damaged party's premises and tore an animal and ate it, the owner is liable for full damages. So it's saying, listen, we have a problem with Ravina. If Ravina wants to say it's carrion damage, it can't be, because why would it then be liable for full damages if it's carrion, if it's unusual damage for a domesticated lion to kill? It should be half damages. Why would Ravina say it's full damages? Guys, so what it's saying is that, you know, Ravina had this question on Shmuel. And what the reality is Shmuel obviously knows it's a domesticated lion, otherwise there wouldn't be a case to begin with. So the Gemara then revises Ravina's comments. Does that make sense why Shmuel is aware it's a domesticated lion? What's the reason, Gavin?
What?
The reason.
What's the reason why we're revising the Gemara and saying that Ravina is turning around and saying it should be carrion damage, because it's unusual for a domesticated lion to attack and kill. So he's talking about a domesticated lion, and the Gemara is turning around, Gavin, and saying that obviously Shmuel knows it's a domesticated lion. The reason he knows it's a domesticated lion is there wouldn't be a legal case unless somebody owned the lion. Are you with me? But Ravina's...
Yeah, I'm with you.
What?
Yeah, I'm with you. What's your question, though?
That was the
I didn't really
question.
get your question.
How do you know if it's a domestic? How do you know if it's a domesticated lion?
Yeah, otherwise there wouldn't be a case. It
Yeah.
would
There wouldn't be a
like
case.
random
Yeah,
bolt
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
lightning hitting you. It would be, just be a nasty incident that you needed therapy for. So the thing of it is, we're saying to Ravina, obviously Shmuel knew it was a domesticated lion, otherwise you wouldn't have a case. So the Gemara then says, well, then Ravina probably knew this, so it's going to review Ravina's statement and revise it. And the bottom line of it is that according to Ravina, it would seem to be that this would be carrying damage. Why would it be carrying damage? Because he's saying that it's unusual for a domesticated lion to attack and kill. In other words, if you want to say it's domesticated, its behavior shouldn't be that it should be that uncontrollable. That's number one. And number two, he's saying, well, the biggest problem that Shmuel could have in return for the statement for the Brisa, according to Ravina, is that it's a muad, it's considered muad in the field of, it would make sense if the animal, look, the defense for Shmuel is as follows. Let me put it simply. In the field of another, okay, Shane damages full damages, correct? It's more from the out, correct?
Yeah.
So what it's saying is that basically Shmuel is saying that this Brisa actually supports Shmuel, not Ravina. Why? Because this Brisa is talking about a wild animal that damages in the field of another, and it says it's basically full damages. And we know that Shane damages are full damages. If it was carrying damage in the field of another, would you pay full damages?
No.
No, you wouldn't. Only if Ravina held by Rabbi Tarfon. Why? Because in the field of another, there's full damages for carrying damage. But all the rabbis hold, and I think Ravina is amongst them, that for carrying damage in the field of another, it's still half damages, unless the animal is moored.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No,
So in that particular case, this is an argument for Shmuel. Because if Shmuel is considering a domesticated lion that kills and stores an animal or takes it away, or basically even if it tears it and eats it, whatever the case may be, if it's considered Shane damage and the animal is moored in the field of another, this would support Shmuel. The thing that Ravina has is that because the Brisa then can be read in two different ways. If a lion or a wild animal pounces on another animal and starts ripping it and eating it, in that case, it's a normal way a lion eats because it's not afraid of its prey. If again it kills it outright, it's in order to feed it to the cubs, the lioness, or to store it in its lair for later consumption. Both of these ways are normal, and therefore it's considered natural Shane damage to which full muad damages are required in the field of another, an exemption in the public domain. Okay, now that we understand the argument, the Gemara is going to revise Ravina, and then we should be done in a few minutes.
Okay.
So, rather the interpretation of Ravina was not stated in explanation of Shmuel's ruling, but rather in explanation of the Brisa, which ruled that if a lion entered the damaged party's premises and tore an animal and ate it, the owner is liable for full damages. To this, Ravina said that the reason the Brisa rules this way is not because it is considered a tearing normal for a lion. For we can say that when a Brisa taught this ruling, it taught even in the case of a domesticated lion, and even according to the view of Rav Elazar, who said that it's not normal for a domesticated lion to attack. Thus, the reason for the Brisa's ruling is certainly not due to behavior being considered normal. So the Gemara asked, but if so, then the owner of the lion should only be required to pay half damages, since the damage is unusual. So Ravina is actually quoting Rav Eliezer that says it's not normal damage. And for that particular case, it should be considered carrying damage. And then the Gemara says in response, okay, so fine. We hear that you're saying it's carrying damage, we get it, but then why is it considered muad? in the field of another if it's carrying damage? Good question. So the answer is as follows. The Gemara answers, the Brisa speaks of a case, according to obviously Ravina, where the lion became a muad. It killed 3 times and its owner was warned. Thus he pays full damages. So Ravina is saying, listen, this isn't a problem at all for carrying damage. We're talking about a muad lion that has done this more than 3 times. So the lion here is muad, and that's why it's paying full damages. But it's still a case of carrying. This isn't a proof to Shane. I think it's a good argument back.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's saying, okay, that's fine. But then the Gemara raises another objection against this, and it says, if so, why is it that the Brisa teaches this law among the subcategories of Shane? Because do you remember it said in 29b, it said that when it brought this Brisa, this was in connection with all the subcategories of Shane. So the Gemara now gives a whop of an argument back. It says, fine, I hear you say it's carrying. I hear you say it's a muad ox, and that's fine. It's not a muad ox, a muad lion, and it damaged more than 3 times, so there's full payment. Those are good arguments. But I've got the final clincher for you, and this is the final clincher. Where this Brisa comes from in 29b, this is exactly where it talks about the subcategories of Shane. So how can you say it's carrying? This Brisa is clearly a case of Shane. So that's a whop of an argument. Okay? So, sorry?
It's a whole new ball game there.
It's a whole new ball game, exactly. So it's saying, like, what are you bringing this Karen issue for? Because clearly we see that this is why the Brisa teaches this law among the subcategories of Shane. It should have taught, we're on 16b3 now, we've just, and among the subcategories of Keren. Since according to this explanation, it refers to damage that is unusual where the lion became habituated. So it's exactly that. It's a game changer. It says you can't bring this Brisa because this is a Brisa of Shane. This doesn't help your case. And if you want to talk about Keren and the subcategories of Keren and the Muad ox and everything else, then fine. But this doesn't help your case because according to this explanation, it refers to damage that is unusual to which the lion became habituated, according to Ravina's explanation. So the Gemara concludes this is indeed a difficulty. So it doesn't really have a resolution because according to Ravina, listen, it's very simple according to Ravina. Any time that a domesticated lion damages, it's considered like if it's truly domesticated, in his opinion. It doesn't just pounce and kill or kill normally, etc. This is a case of Keren. Why? Because it's unusual for a domesticated lion to hunt. Otherwise, it's a wild lion. It hasn't been domesticated. And according to Shmuel, it's saying, yes, we are talking about a domesticated animal in the sense that it has an owner. And that owner is liable for damage if it's in the field of another, as a classic case of Shane, in full damages. In the public domain, it's exempt. But it's still a case where it has an owner. And this is the way that the animal naturally hunts and eats. All right. And on this note, we've lost Michael. So we finished. And thanks, guys.
Yeah, mate.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, James.
All right. Cheers, eh?
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Thanks.